You are listening to Gangland Wire, hosted by former Kansas City Police Intelligence Unit Detective Gary Jenkins.
Well, welcome all you wiretappers out there back here in the studio of Gangland Wire. I say the same thing over again, but I think people like that familiarity. I have on a Zoom call and be on the audio podcast too, my good friend, part-time co-host, really, Camulus Robinson. Welcome, Cam.
Hey, Gary, how you doing? Glad to be back.
You know, Cam first got hold of me. He was really just a fan, I think. And he sent me an email.
Right.
And he said he appreciated how I did my research. And that's what he liked about the show. So I got in touch with him and we talked a little bit. And I realized he liked to do that kind of research. And I could always use some help on the show. So I said, hey, let's do a show together. And
yeah.
And he's actually researched a lot of the shows that I've done because I got busy on that movie I did about theft. And I depended on him quite often to help me get a show out every week or at least 3 times out of the month. And he did all the research and I just kind of trailed along and acted like I knew something. But Cam does know his stuff. I'll tell you right now, folks, Cam knows his stuff and he does the research and if he says it's going to be right on as factually as you can get any kind of information like that. Sometimes it's hard to figure out between the myth and the facts, but anyhow.
I think we both try and double check what we say before we put it out there, Gary. That's what I really liked about what you were putting out. So we try and trust but verify, right?
Right. Even though sometimes I might not let the facts get in the way of a good story.
That's right. Well, that's the life that we're studying, right?
Right. That's for sure. That's the thing about this life, this mob life. There's so much myth out there that it's sometimes hard to discern. And that's one of those myths, even up to modern times, is really pervasive, and that's about who really killed Joey Gallo. I think we've got down to what we think is who really did it, but boy, there's a lot of people that really believe Frank Sheeran killed Joey Gallo, mainly because of the movie, but there was other people before the movie that believed that because he wrote a book that said he did it. And a couple other reasons why they kind of pegs that they hung their hat on, if you will. But let's start out talking a little bit about Joey Gallo. Crazy Joey the blonde. He had blonde chest hair.
That's rare among us Italians. I don't fall into that category. I can tell you.
He must have been must have had some northern Italian in him. Somebody from up there around Florence or something, or
right.
But, you know, he was a unique guy. He was truly in the mob world. He was unique. He was crazy. And I believe later on he was diagnosed by some probably prison psychologist as being mentally ill, whatever that was exactly. Do you remember what that was?
Schizoid tendencies or something. You see that a lot. You see that a lot with the mob guys, though. So it's hard to know if that was a real diagnosis or if another I'm putting on. You see, I can name 4 or 5 guys who, when they were in prison, and it, you know, I guess they're all sociopaths, but you see a lot of them when they're trying to get out of the service or trying not to go to the military, and they flunked the test with flying colors, and I'm sure most of them earned it, but there does seem to be a preponderance of guys who don't do well on those psychiatric exams. But I think Joey earned his the natural way.
Yeah. Of course, he was a young mobster, came out of Red Hook, but a little later in his life where he got so famous and so well known, before we go back into his early life, his last stint in the penitentiary, he had some kind of awakening, I would say, and he had a pretty good bit to do. He did about 10 years, and in 10 years, you can either go down the pits or you can improve yourself. And I know a lot of guys I've known and a lot of people out here, former mobsters that I talk to today, have done that, and they've tried to improve themselves and lead a different life. Now, he didn't ever want to lead a different life other than the mobster's life. But when he's in the penitentiary, my research led me to believe that he read and read and read a lot. He even learned the Evelyn Wood speed reading technique, which a lot of you younger guys won't know that. It was a famous speed reading technique. I don't remember exactly how it worked, but and when he came out, he picked up on popular culture when he came out. A lot of mobsters are like in Kansas City. Nick Zavella was real conservative. He didn't want his guys to grow long hair or beards during the 60s and 70s when everybody else was. Even and with the young guys started growing long hair and beards, he would say something and get rid of that shit. Don't look like a hippie. They almost killed one guy. Probably they did kill him, and some of the things they were saying was they didn't trust him anymore now that he became a fucking hippie. So but when he came out, he got onto popular culture. He was dressing the part of a New York hipster in the 1950s and 60s. He was a classic movie gangster. He'd have like a dark shirt and a white tie and a pinstripe suit.
Yeah, when he went before the that infamous scene when he got called before the McClellan, and he said, "Oh, this would be a good carpet to shoot dice on." He remarks in this book that they wanted a gangster, so he was going to give him a gangster. I mean, that entire thing was an act. I mean, he knew the gangster that people wanted, and in different crowds, he could just he could mold himself to whatever the crowds wanted. He knew how to read a room.
Yeah, it was. That's the one where he wore the sunglasses inside.
Right.
That was like a bombshell among the conservative law enforcement people of the day, where he didn't have the respect for that commission to even take his sunglasses off. So he was something else. He got to know because of this. He's in New York. He's in Manhattan. He gets to know sophisticated New Yorkers, and I just heard a saying from somebody. I told this guy, a Springfield, Massachusetts mobster named Chicky Ciccatelli, he's connected with John Gotti Jr. right now. There's something coming up in the media that he's a part of, and Gotti Jr. is going to do, I don't know what. But he made a statement. He said, everybody wants the bandit to get away. And I remember Smokey and the Bandit. We all pulled for the bandit to get away. And he said that about mob guys and the popularity of mob guys today. And he said, everybody likes the bandit to get away. And I said, man, I'm going to use that. He said, well, it's not really mine. He said, I got it from Gotti Jr. So I don't know, but we all like the bandit to get away. And so that's what happened with Joey Gallo. Everybody likes the bandit to get away. They don't want to be the bandit, and they don't want to have too much attention paid to him by the bandit, but they want him to get away. And he got to know people like Ben Gazzara and Peter Falk in New York, who were kind of a rounder kind of guys, if I remember right. And the playwright Neil Simon and people like that.
Modern reference, you've got Jerry Orbach, who was on Law and Order for so long, who played the detective on Law and Order. That was Jerry and Marta Orbach. Yeah.
Matter of fact, he was in the restaurant. Orbach and his wife were in the restaurant just when he got killed, or did they see him? Oh, they saw him at the Copacabana just before and invited him to come eat with them, and he didn't come, which I bet Orbach's glad he didn't go eat with Gallo that night. So, another thing is there's a famous book by, if you're of a certain age, you'll remember this book by New York columnist Jimmy Breslin, The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight. It was about the Gallos and their first war with the Persicos, and then the Colombo family. And they say that Coppola used some of those situations and incidents that Breslin talked about, and that really happened during that mob war. The saying, going to the mattresses, that came out of that book, Jimmy Breslin. And these guys, they rent an apartment and throw mattresses down, and they'd all hide out there until they went out to do battle with some of the killed one of the opposing family members that they were in a war with. So, but Cam found this a book. It was a first-person account from a Greek associate of the Gallo crew. And his name was Peter Diapolous. Would you say that was a way to say that, Diapolous?
Yeah. Pete the Greek Diapolous, yeah.
Pete the Greek. So it was, when was that published? It was published back in,
I want to say it was 72 or 73. I mean, because they put it out right after Gallo. It would have been right after Gallo. I've got a first edition here. Let me see. It's 76. So yeah, it was right after he let a little bit of time die out. And he wrote this. Steve Lanakis, who wrote it with him, is also a Greek who wrote for the New York Times. Okay. And while they were writing it, they spoke a lot of Greek together. Diapolous would only write it with a Greek writer.
Now, what's interesting is the title is The Sixth Family. And, is that, you think that's because the Gallo brothers, they had such a big, and they did have a big crew. I looked it up and I found like 10 or 15 names of the Gallo crew. You never know exactly who's part of the crew and who isn't, but did they want to become the Sixth Family, make the Gallo family? Is that why it's called that, the Sixth Family?
I think so. I think if you look at, you could compare them to the Spiros in a way. I think they thought that they had in their minds they could take over. I mean, you got during the first Persico War, I mean, you've got the Gallos kidnapping all the leadership of the Persico family, and old man Persico checked himself into a hospital in Florida to avoid anything happening to him down there. But they got the underboss and a couple of high-ranking capos, a consigliere. I mean, these guys meant business, and they're just some kids. So they were a lot of them made guys because they killed Anastasia. Gallo, Joey and his brother Larry were both made guys. The younger brother Albert was not, but I think that they had it in their minds that because they had a large crew, yeah, they could legitimize themselves and have the Gallo family. They ran their street. They, like you said, a lot of guys under them. So
interesting. Now his parents, Umberto and Mary Gallo, were from Italy, I believe, and his father was a prohibition-era bootlegger, like many other immigrants. Now, here's one story I heard about Joey Gallo, which has kind of resonated with me. Those of us of a certain age, there's a movie that came out in 1949 called The Kiss of Death, and I've seen these clips. Richard Widmark plays a gangster character that was the epitome of a gangster in the 50s. His name was Tommy Udo, UDO. And he had this accent, the way he would talk, and it said that Gallo liked to talk like this. He kind of mimicked that guy. So check this clip out of Tommy Udo talking.
Double-crossing squealers, both of you.
What's the matter? I don't know nothing.
So the yellow squirt beat it, huh? Took a powder, huh? That rat. Where is he? Where'd he go? I'm asking you, where's that squealing son of yours? You think a squealer can get away from me? Huh? You know what I do to squealers? I let them have it in the belly.
So that sounds like a real gangster, doesn't
it? That is what you think of. I remember that movie from years ago, and yeah, that's what you think of when you think of gangster talk.
So, I see now. I look back at my notes. It was when Gallo had a charge pending around this time, 49-50. He was diagnosed with mental illness in the Kings County Hospital Center in Brooklyn. They thought he had schizophrenia. And claim that the cops first started calling him Crazy Joey, which makes sense. A lot of cops would maybe had access to that report. Mm-hmm. Now, this guy that wrote this book, Peter Diapolous, remember how he first met Crazy Joey?
He grew up with them on the street, if I recall correctly. The Greek was one of the few non-Italians at Red Hook, if I'm remembering correctly, and he knew them from the time they were kids. A lot of people didn't realize that he was, like you said, he was with Gallo when he was assassinated, but people didn't realize that the Greek was with them going way on back, when they went to the mattresses with the Persicos and everything. And he references that a lot in his book, but the Greek had been with them for years. Back when Larry Gallo, the oldest brother, was running the crew, he was loyal to Larry Gallo. And then when Larry died of cancer while Joey was doing his bit in prison. Joey comes out of prison and takes over the crew from the youngest brother, Albert Kid Blast, and Joey runs the crew until he dies. But the Greek was a steady figure for years, grew up more or less with them.
So Pete the Greek talks about the murder of Albert Anastasia and kind of gives an insider view of that. Now, there's always, there's a couple of different stories about who actually killed Albert Anastasia. And if you don't know that murder, this is the murder. Albert Anastasia had his own family. He was called the Mad Hatter, or what was the other nickname he had?
The Executioner.
The Executioner. He was one bad dude, one crazy dude. And he was really, what I remember about the situation, he was exerting his muscle, trying to push around some of the other mobsters, trying to move in on some Lansky stuff down in Cuba, trying to expand his domain, shall we say. And Joe Profaci didn't like that. And Profaci was an old school mobster, and he got together with Vito Genovese, is the story.
And Gambino was his Scalise was Anastasia's underboss. He was murdered. And then Carlo Gambino became Anastasia's second underboss.
So this is really the development of the Manhattan, shall we say, New York City mafia families in the 50s. So Profaci had taken the Gallo brothers in as a crew under his crime family. He was immensely successful, but he was also notoriously tight, and he wouldn't pay anybody anything and tried to get everything for himself. But Gallo was trying to, he was trying to rise in that world. And Pete the Greek claimed that they took on the contract to kill Albert Anastasia, which was a pretty bold move on anybody's part. He was a boss of one of the 5 families at the time, and they had Profaci and Genovese behind them. I don't know if they knew exactly who all of the other bosses were behind them at the time. It's always a dicey deal. You get caught, and then those bosses that had you do it will give you up. And
right.
Say, we didn't know anything about this. We got to kill them. But Pete the Greek, he claimed that, he laid it out pretty good. I don't know, you remember how he laid it out, Cam?
You go into it. It's let me get caught up here.
I got some notes here on that, folks.
Yeah.
It's hard to remember some of this stuff off the top of your head, but so Larry Gallo, according to Pete the Greek, conducted surveillance on Anastasia and found that he went to this barbershop with a pattern. You never want to get a pattern when you're in that life, but he went to this barbershop like a certain day every week. And I don't remember the day, but it was a certain day every week. So after a while, they okay, we could get him in the barbershop, because it seemed like he relaxed in the barbershop. Even his bodyguard that was always be with him would drift off while he was in the barber's chair. So they tooled up the Gallo brothers, and what Pete the Greek claims is a guy named Joseph Gionelli and Carmine Persico, who will turn on the Gallos in the end. And there was another guy altogether, and it was a classic mob hit. And they came up with a car. The wheelman waited at the curb with a getaway car. Another guy stood as a lookout there on the street. Another guy inside the hotel lobby. And then finally 2 men. And there's another classic is they dress identically and just wear scarves around their mouths where you wouldn't really look, with sunglasses on. So people wouldn't really, wouldn't think too much about it. And it's really hard when 2 guys or 3 guys dress identically in a deal like that. Everything, all the details kind of blend in together. That's a really smart. If you guys want to go out and do a hit or do some kind of a robbery, all of you dress identically, because it makes it a lot harder for people to identify you. And
that's what they did with Gotti.
Yeah.
They all wore those Russian hats.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Barber will relate that they came in, just started shooting, just walked in while he's in a chair, pushed the barber aside, just started shooting. Anastasia lunges out of the chair. They said towards his reflection in the mirror, probably the only thing he could see, and then collapses immediately, and he'll die on the floor really before the emergency crews arrive. And they left his body there because there's a ton of photographs out there of him on the floor and people standing around. Back in those days, the police didn't lock down a scene so much as they do today.
Right.
A good photographer, especially one that was already in with the cops, would have bought him a lunch or a cup of coffee, or slipped them a few bucks every time they hit a crime scene. That photographer could get in close and get the money shot, as we say. The hit team, after they murdered him, they just walked out of the lounge, out of the lobby, out into the lobby, disappear. Just disappear out on the street because they got a car already waiting, and they don't run, they don't make any extra moves. And I could be willing to bet that they threw those guns away. They drove pretty close to the river, the East River, or the bay, or whatever body of water was close, and pitched those guns as soon as they got away. Now, Diapolous will claim that the Gallo brothers were all made as a result of that. I think Persico may have already been a made guy at that time. I'm not sure. But that's a story about who killed Albert Anastasia, and that was really from a what we would almost call a primary source.
Yeah, that would have been in the 50s. They closed the books in I want to say it was after Appalachian, right at the end of the 50s when the FBI caught on. So that would have been in the 50s. The books were pretty open from what we know. So yeah, the Gallos and Persico would have been some of the last guys made. And so yeah, that does tie up.
Now there is another story out there that a guy named Joseph Riccobono and a couple other guys did this murder, but I don't know. I couldn't find that much about that. It's certainly not somebody that was that close to them telling the story. What do you think about that other story?
The only other thing that I've heard that makes much sense is there's a Patriarcha guy who supposedly came up. I can't remember his name offhand. He's not Italian. Who supposedly came up under Patriarcha's orders to assist with the murder, and then he drove back down. There's Vinnie Teresa talks about this guy coming up and driving back. Now, the reason that might make sense is because Nicky Bianco, who was a member of the Patriarcha family, was originally tied in with the Gallos. And then when the Gallos had their falling out with Profaci, the Patriarcha family helped to mediate. Henry Tamilio, the underboss of the Patriarchas, helped to mediate the dispute. So there were close ties between the Patriarchas and the Gallos, and also between Genovese. So that's the only thing that I've heard that makes sense as far as placing anybody else with the Anastasias. His name was Kazarian, or somebody who was at the scene was a Patriarcha guy who came up to assist. But that's the only one that really has any sort of ring of truth to it. But that's, as far as anything else I've heard, the Gallos with Persico is really the only one that makes sense. And Pete the Greek's account really is the one that really lays it out.
Makes sense. And he was real close to these guys. He didn't go on it. Mm-hmm. He wouldn't go. He wasn't Italian. He would not take him on that, more than likely.
Right.
I suppose he could, but they had plenty of people like the three brothers. The brothers aren't going to rat each other out. So that's the safest way to do anything. You got the blood connection. You got the mob blood connection. So I don't know. I'll have to go with that. It seemed like that meeting at the La Stella restaurant that the cops stumbled into, supposedly, or kind of a setup deal. Santo Traficante was up from Florida at the time, and they said he was staying in that hotel, that Sheraton Hotel, and he checked out the next day and went back to Florida. So, who knows?
John Nazarian was that? I just found him. John Nazarian was a Patriarcha guy. That's the only one, and I don't know, but that's the only addition to that story, whether he drove or was lookout, that has made any sense. The Patriarchas might have played a role, but I can't say. But you're right. That I was always pretty curious about Tampa having breakfast with Anastasia and then flying out that morning.
Yeah. So Diapolous describes the Gallo crew as an outlaw crew, which makes sense. You get those kinds of little things that really ring true, and that makes sense. And when you look at the makeup of it, he had, according to Diapolous, they had a Greek, him, 2 Syrians, an Egyptian, a Puerto Rican, a Jew, an Irishman, about 14 or 15 Italians. So
partridge in a pear tree.
Really. Now, Vicamuso was in that crew, and Carmine Persico was in the Gallo crew when they were early. This Nick Bianco was there, and then he ends up going to the Patriarca family, as you mentioned. Michael Rizzatello was part of that crew, and he moved out to Los Angeles. So this was kind of a training ground for a lot of mob bosses over the next few years.
That's a good way to put it. That's an interesting way to put it.
Now, they had this meeting place on President Street in the Lower East Side, the East Village Mafia, shall we say. I just interviewed an author did a book about the East Village Mafia. But they had to do this Anastasia hit. They had to have the bosses behind him. That was too big a deal because he was an old school ally of Frank Costello. And we know Vito Genovese and Frank Costello were not exactly bosom buddies.
And that's right. And Costello had just been shot.
Right. So I don't know, man. It's sometimes you can't explain things, or it's business as usual. People wanted Anastasia out of the way. Maybe Profaci was easier to deal with. Now, he didn't live much longer after that. Can't remember who took over his
Gambino.
Yeah, that's right. Carlo Gambino took over the Profaci family.
Took over the Anastasia family.
Anastasia family.
Too many vowels, Gary. Too many vowels.
Who took over from Profaci? He didn't live that much.
Joe Magliocco.
Okay, all right. So and here's a story that Pete the Greek told that I thought was indicative of what I mentioned about Profaci. Profaci, in the late 50s, he was mad at a bookmaker and a loan shark, a guy named Frank Abate Marco. I'm not sure how you pronounce that.
Abate Marco, yeah.
Abate Marco. And in reality, he probably just wanted to take the business away from the guy and get it for himself, but he was mad at him for whatever reason. He ordered the Gallo crew to kill him. Said that the guy owed me $50,000 and was withholding it just to protest. Said, I'm not giving in to you anymore. And somebody did shoot and kill Abate Marco in a tavern over in Brooklyn. And most people believe that Gallo brothers did this. Other people, Joey Gallo would claim that he didn't do it, but this event became the catalyst for the Gallo move against Joe Profaci, which started one of the early wars between the established crime families and the Gallo brothers. He didn't pay him. He didn't pay him hardly anything. He promised that he would do more for him, and then he didn't do anything.
Give him part of Abate Marco's rackets, his policy rackets.
Right, that's what
policy guy.
So it was, he was notoriously tight-fisted, and he pissed off the wrong people there. So shortly after that, they made a crazy play against Profaci. Just to let you know a little bit about Crazy Joey Gallo and his brothers, True. This is just before Profaci died. They kidnapped his underboss, who became the bosses, as Cam mentioned, Joseph Magliocco, and 4 capos, Profaci capos, and one of them was Joe Columbo, which will come back into the story later on, won't it? They sent a message to Profaci that they wanted this bigger piece of the action, and they didn't want to pay so much tribute. So they bargained back and forth. Gallos brought the plan to their crew, who were all involved, and Carmine Persico was involved with the crew. And what they wanted to do, and what one of the Gallo brothers did, was to just go ahead and give the Profaci people back and then start negotiating. It's like a message. We're sending a message. Now you better negotiate with us. You know what I mean?
It was Larry, the oldest brother, who was running the Gallo crew at the time. I think he was into Joe, and Joe at the whole time is chomping at the bit. Let's kill one of them.
Yeah, that'll send a message, won't it? So Larry prevailed, and they released the hostages. And when they released the hostages, Profaci just declared war, and they started. First, they stuck a guy. They killed a guy named Joe Jelly, Gioeli. What a hell of a name that is. That was the Gallo brothers, and this was where the fish wrapped in a newspaper story came from. Mm-hmm. After they killed him and they dumped him in the ocean, they sent a fish wrapped in a newspaper to Joe Jelly's wife. Then Profaci tried to pull a little trick on him. He had Carmine Persico in his pocket by then, and Gallo still thought he was part of their crew. Profaci offered to meet with Larry Gallo, or send his driver, John Sciamoni, to meet with Larry and talk about some peace terms, and maybe we could negotiate this out. Well, Carmine Persico and another guy knew where this joint was, and they got in there early and laid down in the booth. Then when Sciamoni and Gallo got there, he directed Gallo to the next booth over, and as soon as they sat down, Persico jumped up over the top of the seat, put a piece of rope over Gallo's head, and started strangling him, garroting him, I think is the term, mm-hmm. Isn't it?
Yeah.
And as he was dying, a beat cop opens the door and steps in right out of The Godfather,
right.
And steps in and says, "What the fuck's going on?" At that time, Persico and Sciamoni, they run out the door. They have a little gun battle with the police officer, and in the melee, Persico gets up and gets away, and Gallo, of course, lives. Well, that's where Carmine Persico got the nickname the Snake, is my understanding. Mm-hmm. Is that your understanding on that?
Yeah, he was the Snake. He was the double cross. He was, shifty guy. That's two double crosses, you figure. He turned on Profaci, and then he turned on the Gallos.
Really?
The Gallos hated him after that.
Joey goes to the penitentiary after that. He's trying to extort some money from a guy named Teddy Moss, who was wired up, and Profaci sends word out to Moss that, "Hey, I'll protect you if you'll go ahead and testify against Gallo," and he did, and he got, I don't know, 8 or 9 years in the penitentiary, 10 years.
That's dirty in that world. I mean, I got in the mob world, for a mob boss to offer to protect somebody to testify. I mean, Gary, that's not something you hear about in the mob world. Yeah. I mean, I'm if somebody wants to protect themselves, I'm fine. I'm not saying people shouldn't testify. But for a mob boss to set somebody else up to testify, that seems to break some of their rules, I would think.
Yeah, well. But anyhow, Crazy Joey goes to the penitentiary and for this period of time, and that's when he starts improving himself, as I talked about before. But he also makes some connections, and this is when he makes connections with black gangsters. There was a real well-known Harlem heroin dealer named Nicky Barnes, who became famous as the, almost like the guy before him was the godfather of Harlem, I believe. But Nicky Barnes was a really big time heroin dealer in Harlem.
If you've seen the movie American Gangster, right, about Frank Lucas, Cuba Gooding Jr. plays Leroy Nicky Barnes.
Okay. And so
Bumpy Johnson ran Harlem before the two of them.
Right. That's the Godfather of Harlem series with Forrest Whitaker, and he was the first one that kind of threw in with what was the prostitute's name there? Queenie something, but they really ran all the rackets in Harlem and dealt with the Italians, and then it was Bumpy Johnson. I mean, then it was Frank Lucas and this Nicky Barnes.
Yeah.
Well, he connected with Nicky Barnes. There were people trying to kill Gallo and beat him up, and once he connected with Nicky Barnes, well, the large black contingency of men in the penitentiary, Nicky Barnes controlled, and from then on, nobody went after Joey Gallo in the penitentiary as long as he was close to Nicky Barnes.
Yeah, it was dangerous for him because the Persicos could still get him in prison. Right. So he was in as much danger in as he was out.
Now, Barnes would later say that he called him Crazy Joey. He said Crazy Joey loved hijacking trucks. He wanted to do some business with me and my people to hijack trucks. Said Gallo mentored him in Mafia business practices and how it needs to be more organized, kind of like John Gotti did with the Aryan Brotherhood. It always appeared to me, and that one guard I knew that was in there that watched Gotti meet with the Aryan Brotherhood people every day. He always sat at the table with them, and he said it seemed to me like to the guard that the Aryan Brotherhood calmed down, became more businesslike in their illegal activities. They were still doing all, controlled all the dope in the penitentiaries and had a big operation outside the penitentiaries, nationwide. And he just felt like that they listened to Gotti and modeled themselves along Gotti and Mafia, more businesslike lines.
Nicky Barnes did create a commission of himself and several other guys, 5-man commission.
Yeah, interesting. Well, during this time, Diapolous did tell us one story about how he and Larry Gallo and Nicky Bianco tried to kill Carmine Persico. They said a remote control underneath the hood of his car, a bomb, sat back and watched, and they had noticed that every time he'd go get in his car, he'd raise the hood and check for bombs. So he figured that would be the time that they would throw the switch when he raised that hood. The guy that was supposed to throw the switch didn't throw it when he raised the hood, and then Persico didn't see the bomb, but he got inside the car and they set off the bomb then. But it wasn't set in a place where it would kill anybody, kind of like Lefty Rosenthal out in Las Vegas. The bomb wasn't in a good place and it wasn't big enough.
Yeah, that's the Sparrows could help him with that, putting 23 sticks under his car.
Really?
Y'all in Kansas City don't play with that dynamite.
Yeah, and when that last Sparrow got killed, they put so much dynamite under that little used car office that he was in that it blew him and his wheelchair clear out through the roof and out into the parking lot. That's the way, if you're going to kill somebody with a bomb, you got to have enough to kill them. But, in New York City, you got people walking down the street and you do not want any collateral. The mob does not like collateral damage. I'll say that. But, and I think like that Sabella Sparrow deal here in Kansas City, they knew they were sitting and watching. And he knew he was in that building by himself, and there wasn't, they could see the whole lot, and you couldn't see anybody else around. And so, they had it underneath the office. So I would imagine if there'd been anybody came in with him, they just wouldn't have hit the switch until some other time, in which they could catch him in there. Just wait till he got in there by himself. Hell, they might have tried it 2 or 3 other times and
right.
Catch him by himself, because we have never had any collateral damage from bombings in Kansas City, and I don't know about other cities. I can't think of any. There may be, maybe in Cleveland. I don't know. They did a lot of bombing in Cleveland.
What? I hadn't heard of anything, but I, like you said, they're pretty careful. I mean, bombs are usually either send a message or to they are very careful with bombing.
So let's talk a little more about Diapolous. He talks about how Joe Columbo kind of like started moving up. He ends up being the boss of the old Profazzi family, and it becomes the Colombo family. Colombo knew that Carlo Gambino was ambitious, shall we say. He thought maybe Gambino wanted to be the capo de tutti di capo and the boss of all bosses. And he kind of modeled himself after that. He exposed a plot to kill Gambino, And Gambino then made sure that Joe Columbo was the boss of the Profaci family as Magliocco went away. And
yeah, Joe Bonanno and Joe Magliocco, the boss, the new boss of the Profacis, came up with a plan to kill Carlo Gambino, Tommy Lucchese, and Frank De Simone in L.A. Bonanno wanted to take over Los Angeles, and then they wanted to. Gambino and Lucchese were considered the liberal members of the commission, and so they wanted to take over the commission. And there's some people who say they were going to kill Magadino up in Buffalo, but they figured they could take control of the commission, and Bonanno placed himself as capo di tutti capi. And Colombo, who had a long history of doing heavy work, was supposed to be the guy who was in charge of it all. And instead he went to Gambino, like you said, because he knew that Gambino was a sharp guy who was a dangerous guy. And he told Gambino and Lucchese about the plan.
Well, that was a good move on his part, because Gambino did rise, and Colombo became the boss, and Larry and Albert Gallo brokered a peace with Joe Columbo. Now here's kind of an interesting little story that Pete the Greek tells, is that the commission appointed this Nick Bianco, who had been a Gallo member of the crew, to represent the Gallo crew at a sit down with the Colombo family to try to get over this Colombo War. But they brought in Raymond Patriarca from New England to negotiate, and they agreed on peace. And what's really interesting is then Nick Bianco ends up transferring up to New England under Patriarca and spent the rest of his mob career as a member of the Patriarca family. It's kind of like if you watch somebody in another unit at work or another division or whatever, say, hey, I like the way that guy works. He's pretty good. Can I get him? Let me see if I can get him to transfer to my unit or my division. So mob works the same way, I guess.
Right.
I first read that and I thought, well, what the hell?
He really ended up a pretty high-ranking guy, Bianco. I guess he must not have been made in the Profacis, but yeah, once he transferred to the Patriarcha, he made his way on up.
Yeah, well,
he may have been. I'm trying to remember if he was boss in the 90s. I think that when they had that huge bust of the Patriarcha family, Bianco kept himself pretty low.
Yeah.
I think he became the boss in the 90s once they wiped everybody out.
I didn't really remember that. It's, like we were saying earlier, it's kind of hard to keep up on all the details and all the different families. But back to Joey Gallo, all this is going on while he's in the penitentiary, and he's like, he's educating himself and he's developing this persona.
Reading a lot of existentialism, a lot of that Jean-Paul Sartre, and a lot of Albert Camus, and changing his way he looks at life and what means what and what's important and what isn't. And
I've read some of that myself, and it's like life, to them, life is meaningless. Mm-hmm. So you just make whatever meaning you want out of it.
Right.
And so Gallo, he if life's meaningless, don't try to take on somebody else's meaning. Just make your own meaning out of life, do what you want. And when he came out, he was like a different guy. I think it seemed that's when he started hobnobbing with celebrities and becoming this celebrity gangster.
I wonder if he had, and this is kind of an odd way, but he had just come out of a war, and a lot of that existentialism came out of World War I. And you wonder if somebody who had been day to day living with the idea that they might be dead at any minute and people shooting at them, have some little bit of PTSD and that sort of understanding that all things are, you accept that life and death is what it is, that sort of shaded his view, that living so close to death and as he did for so long in that war, kind of a PTSD almost with Gallo.
Plus the penitentiary.
That's right.
You're living next to death every day in the penitentiary.
That's right.
Now you can get comfortable. You can get protection from some people, but still you're vulnerable as hell in the penitentiary.
That's a good point.
It's a tough world.
That's a good point.
So Pete the Greek tells a few stories. Once he decides he's out, his brother, who Larry is dead of cancer. You know, Joey's now the boss. He's the strongest personality of this crew, and the boss. He's back out. Joe Columbo tries to meet with him and offer him some money as a peace gesture. Well, the story Pete the Greek tells, he only offered him $1,000. I don't know what the deal is with that, but that could be like an insult. And Gallo wouldn't even attend the meeting. And immediately what he starts doing is planning on killing Joe Columbo, because he thought he ought to be the boss of the old Profaci family. So Pete the Greek starts telling stories about some of the many plots to kill Joe Columbo before he actually gets killed, which is, you know, one of those stories to this day is argued about on right. Who did that and how that went down, which it is. It's one of the strangest stories to me in mobdom. That
absolutely.
It's just like, what the hell? I mean, remember at the time reading it in the newspapers, like, what the hell?
Kind of wonder if Frank Sheeran did it.
Really? And then killed Jerome Johnson.
Right.
Gave him up as a scapegoat, kind of like this, kind of like the JFK killing.
Lee Harvey Oswald.
Lee Harvey Oswald, you know, they just shoved the black guy in there and reached around him and shot and killed Joe Columbo, and then said, "Hey, look what this guy did.
Right.
Let's kill him."
Right.
And they did. So anyhow, they got a van. This is pretty complicated. That's why good thing about this book is he's got all these great details.
Yeah.
They cover the inside walls with mattresses and fiberglass to insulate any sound. And it's like something the cops would do in a way if you want a van in close, really close to whoever you're watching. If you're down by the the Ravenite Social Club, you want to sit right across the street or right next to it, while you might insulate to make sure there's no sound comes out. Put a one-way glass in the back door and the side panels, and a plywood partition between the driver and the rear compartment. I sat in minivans that were tricked out like that. I think ours had a periscope in it. We could raise up, look like a vent on the top, but it was a periscope that you could raise up. You could even attach a camera to it and shoot pictures through it.
There's not a lot of guys that can bring stories like that here.
They also drilled some holes. This is reminiscent of the Washington, D.C. Beltway killers. Remember that?
That's
father
right.
And son.
That's right.
The father had the son drive, and he had that. It was a big Chevy, full-size car, and he got in the trunk and drilled a hole in the trunk, and then pull up to a gas station or wherever people were stopped and with their cars and standing around for a little bit, and they'd shoot and kill people. So they drilled a couple of holes big enough to stick the rifle barrel out and got a scoped rifle. And first one they tried, Colombo, I guess, had a funeral parlor. I didn't really remember that, but it's right out of, you ever watch the movie, The 7 Ups? I think Roy Snyder was in it. Maybe it's about this, like the intelligence unit watching mobsters. And so their surveillance is, I think it's early on in the movie, they start out there watching a funeral parlor, and they've got a guy undercover inside with the funeral parlor. You know, the story about this, the 7 Ups was a squad that only arrested people that they got convicted of felonies with 7 years or more. Kind of a stupid title, but it was a pretty good mob movie, actually, a little known mob movie. So anyhow, they're staked out this funeral parlor in this van. Watching people come and go, and some kid had gone in and came back out and walked right toward the van, and then started checking the door handles and looking inside. And boy, that happens to you all the time when you're out there in the van. Kids would come along and just wonder if it's open, see if there's anything they get in there and steal, and then go on. But they figured they were burnt, so they gave up on that plan, then moved to his house. And one night they thought they saw him leave. He started to leave, and then some other guys came out and jumped in a Lincoln and drove straight at the van, but then went right on by. They were jumpy as hell. They think it's like typical cops. You always think you're burnt. People always think they're burnt immediately. And all you got to do is just be quiet and calm and don't jump. Don't do anything until it's obvious, because if you're burnt, they let you know you're burnt. But these guys were jumping, and they thought they were burned already. And then it looked like Columbo came out, and then a police car arrived, and said Pete the Greek, he noticed that the guy that they thought Colombo was really a lookalike and wasn't really Colombo, and so they ended up giving up there. It's too much effort. Thought they were burnt, and it just became too hard to do that.
I kept thinking about the words reading this of Corks Vela talking about you've got to lay on a guy, you've got to lay on him, you've got to lay on him, and it seems like a lot of the guys in the Gallo crew, with the exception of Pete the Greek, just didn't want to lay on him. They just wanted to show up and fire the gun and just take off and go get a drink. They didn't. They didn't want to put in the work. A lot of them.
As he said, you got to go where they go.
That's right.
You got to be a block away, less than a block away. You got to sit on them. You got to lay on them. And I remember that term, lay on them. I remember Frank Calabrese Jr. was the first one I heard talking about that. He said, we lay on a guy. I never really heard that before, but we lay on a guy. He said, sometimes you get like a refrigerator box. Well, in a big city, say like you can't get a car on the street. Sometimes you can't get in a good position. Maybe you can't get it's best to get an apartment right across the street and look out the window. But you could take a refrigerator box and set it out there and cut a couple of holes in it and sit there for a long time before anybody's going to mess with you. That's the way to kill somebody like that. It's a tough way to do it because you got to have patience. We had the same problem with other policemen. They want to go out and drive by, and if there's nothing right there, they just drive on and go look somewhere else. They just want to keep moving. The guys that did better were the guys who just sat and watched and waited, and then you make those connections, see people show up and see what's really going on. You can't just do it just by driving by. Mm-hmm. So they continue on, and during this time, Joe Columbo, and I don't really remember a lot about this. There's a lot of discussion about this Italian American rights organization that Joe Columbo formed. I remember when The Godfather first came out, all the Italian people in Kansas City bought out the tickets. It wasn't a mob connected deal. It was what's the name of it? Columbus something, because Columbus Park was the area where Italians first moved into. But anyhow, they had an organization that bought out all the tickets, refused to go. And so Joe Columbo had started this organization to support
Italian American Civil Rights League.
Right. And one thing they were against was all this media attention on the Mafia.
Well, it was a big damn scam, but you notice in The Godfather, they never say Cosa Nostra and they never say the word mafia. Yeah. That was because Columbo said they couldn't say it. He had the unions, he had the film unions, and he said they couldn't say those two terms. They do say them in Godfather 2 because Columbo was dead, but they don't say them in part 1.
Ah, interesting. I hadn't picked up on that. But so he's done this, and I understand he was making money out of this thing, and there was a lot of jealousy also among other mob bosses to see him do this. For whatever reason, they like have a demonstration at Columbus Circle of all places. They're in, I think it's on the west side of Manhattan. Can't remember how far up it is, like, I don't know, 60, 70 some street up right off of, if you go up Broadway, I believe, while you come to Columbus Circle, right next to Central Park. So he's having a big demonstration and getting a lot of press attention, a lot of press people there, and news photographers are there, and there's a black dude there that's got a camera, and he pushes up close and he pulls a gun, or he's got a gun, and he shoots and kills Joe Columbo. And then one of Columbo's bodyguards shoots and kills him. Guy's name was Jerome Johnson, and they were never able to solve this murder. The official theory is he was a lone gunman. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think that the easy answer is that Joe Gallo made connections with black guys, and that he got this guy to kill Columbo. But after reading this book, this casts quite a bit of doubt on that.
Do you remember what Pete the Greek claimed?
Pete the Greek says he had a bunch of different theories, but he said they didn't really have any connection to Jerome Johnson, and that none of the guys that they knew had connection. He says that Abby Schatz about Marco's son might have done it because he had a bunch of policy, and he might have done it because he was mad at the Gallos for his father. He said that the Columbos, themselves might have done it because I don't know. He said that Carlo Gambino might have done it and used a black guy because he wanted to direct the suspicion at Gallo, but he had a bunch of different theories. All of them were designed to point the attention at the Gallos. What's interesting about this, though, is even in 1976, Pete the Greek is saying it wasn't us, and we knew that they were coming after us, and that everybody thought it was us. Yeah. He talks about, Pete the Greek. I guess he did not have. Another thing to keep in mind is he didn't have immunity at the time this was written. So if he had planned to murder, he talks about several times they were going to commit murders, but I don't remember any time where he talks about shooting people who shot at him.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he would be as free with information that he had shot Gallo, but he's pretty insistent that they did not kill Colombo.
And
it's hard to say.
I found some other information indicated this Jerome Johnson had placed a bomb at the Italian American Civil Rights League office a few months before.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I mean, he could be a lone gunman. He could be just a guy that, Joe Columbo was in the news all the time. People get fixated on people like that. I mean, that happens, and they go out and try to kill them for whatever reason. But it was in the middle of the mob war between the Gallos and the Colombos. So.
Yeah.
And Joey Gallo did have pretty well-known connections in the black gangster community now, but they didn't really connect this Jerome Johnson up, particularly with the one of the heroin gangs or something. So I don't know. It's I guess Frank Sheeran must have done it. It's the only thing I can say.
It's right. It's interesting though when Diapolous begins talking about it, because you really see how these street guys' minds have to work. I mean, he starts weaving together this huge web of intrigue, and he comes up with a bunch of different theories.
Yeah.
And you realize how these guys have to look at it from 17 different angles, because if you don't, you're dead. If you don't see 17 different possibilities and 17 different people to be suspicious of, and X amount of people who are all trying to kill you one time, that's how you end up dead. I mean, that's you really don't have too many friends, because any of them could kill you. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about this book, is it just shows the thought process of a street guy.
Yeah, it does that. So now we're on up into the 1972 and the death of Joey Gallo. Everybody knows he's died, so there's no big reveal here at the end of this. But Pete the Greek was there that night, which is there's like a couple of different stories about that. The one he told, and there's one that other people told under oath that Cam found a New York Times newspaper article that
he discusses that article in the book too.
Pete the Greek and his girlfriend is Gumari, I guess, and Joey and his wife and Joey's sister. And what I thought was interesting, his 10-year-old daughter was out with him. They were out celebrating his birthday, and they went to the Copacabana and were drinking champagne. Now, I got to do a story on the Copacabana and the mob and music business and all that. So that you can look for that one coming. That Copacabana goes way back with the mob, I think, to Costello and back into the 30s, 40s, and 50s. But anyhow, on that particular night, Pete the Greek said Don Rickles was a floor show.
It happened exactly like, honestly, this is the scene. The scene in The Irishman comes from this book, where he bumps into Buffalino and says, "What's it? You still that bullshit league?" And all. Everything in that movie, whoever wrote that scene had access to that book. Just for the audience, so whoever's that scene in The Irishman comes directly word for word from The Sixth Family by Pete Diapolous. It's interesting because in reading it, I thought, you can really see that whoever wrote that scene did have access to this book.
Yeah, and did Frank Sheeran read this book in order to put himself into the as a murderer? But
what we know is based on reading the epilogue, we know that Charles Brandt read this book, because he comments on it 2 or 3 times. So Charles Brandt
really?
talks about this book. So we know that he read it before he wrote I Heard You Paint Houses.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. But Don Rickles insults everybody, Pete the Greek says, and even some Italians as usual. But he was always pretty careful with certain people. He even like looked up there, and there was like an upper terrace where the Gallo party was, made some comments. And Joey stood up and acted like he was going to throw champagne down. Rickles kind of did a little play like that. And another interesting little inside baseball, if you will, Pete the Greek claims that his 10-year-old daughter, Gallo's 10-year-old daughter, is smoking a cigarette. She asked her dad for a light. Now, I don't know. That's like, you wouldn't make something like that up. You wouldn't think of it. I mean, who knows? I mean,
times have changed a bit.
I was 10 years old. There were some of the little tough guys that did smoke cigarettes. So
yeah, my father says he started picking up butts when he was 8.
Yeah,
that's what he said. Of course, he's no longer with us, and that was more or less because of cigarettes. So
probably this Gallo daughter isn't still with us either. That'd be interesting to find her, get her side in this story. But so yeah, and as Cam said, Pete the Greek says, Russell Bufalino's there, and Joey Gallo and Bufalino talk, and Joey knows that Bufalino is supporting Joe Columbo and the Colombo's Italian-American civil rights group. And he makes some derogatory comment that night. Do you really believe in that bullshit league? And Pete Greek says Bufalino didn't smile. Said he just looked away and didn't smile at all. He didn't think it was funny. And it was so tense that another mobster at the table stood up and took Joey by the arm and kind of
that was Frank.
Away.
That was Frank.
Oh, was it? Oh, Frank Sharon?
In Diapolous' book, he said Frank, the goon who was with he said that was Frank. He's like, oh, come on, Joey, we don't, let's just have a drink. You can't talk to him. He's a boss.
I think Pete said, I see now in my notes, Pete said, so he's a boss, I'm a boss,
Yep.
And it was like, he was like throwing up into his face, and he was already, in this war with Columbos, and they already were plotting and planning to kill him. This was the night, as we mentioned earlier, that Jerry Orbach was there, and he and Joey, according to Pete, invited Orbach and his wife to go out for food, but they declined. They didn't know. It wasn't a real insider. It wasn't Pete the Greek that then had told him and then steered him to the Umberto's Clam house that night, for example. Nobody knew where they were going, because what Pete the Greek said, Joey wanted to eat Chinese and drove to Chinatown, right. And the place they wanted to go, a place called Su Ling's, was closed. And so then they're just driving around, and Chinatown just blends right into Little Italy and the Mulberry Street. If you've ever been there, I didn't really realize it till I went there once and realized they're like cheek by jowl, as we say, are like right next to each other. And
yeah.
They saw a big sign for Umberto's Clam house. And so they pulled over, and actually the brother to the guy that owned is a guy named Matthew Iannello.
Matty the horse,
who was big in
Genovese
Street. He was a Genovese guy and ran a lot of the porn and all the rackets down around 42nd Street. He was a pretty well-known mobster at the time. Another mob associate called Joe Pesh, there was a guy called Joe Pesh, but there was a guy named Joseph Luparelli, and he becomes important. He claims that they hollered out to Matty the horse and said, how's the food? And he said, well, my brother owns a place, the food's good. So they went into Umberto's Clam house to celebrate what's Joey Gallo's 43rd birthday. Lupari would help write a book afterwards, and he also was testified to this. And Cam found the newspaper article about that testimony. Can you tell us about that, Cam? What he said went down that night?
So what Luparelli said is that he was a hanger-on. He wanted to be a made guy, and he had sort of done some work for Matty the horse, and he was trying to get tight with the Colombos. He sees Joey Gallo pull in, and he runs down the street to where he knows some of his Colombo guys are, Carmen DiBiase and a couple brothers, and they make a call to Joe Iacovelli, who's the consigliere for the Colombos, He says, go ahead, and he makes a phone call to the Genovese. He says, okay, go ahead and take him out. So they gather up a bunch of guns. These Sonny Pinto, it's DiBiase and a couple of brothers, and 4 or 5 of them run down there, and they see the Gallo brothers, and they shoot it up. They kill them, and they all run out. Pete the Greek fires after them. He unloads his pistol after them, hits the back of the car. He got shot too. He got shot in the rear end, and then I think he shot out the tire. Was it the tire that he hit? But he shot the car. They parked the car at one of the guy's mother's houses, and they were all hiding out. Luparelli, DiBiase, Joe Pesci, these guys were all hiding out at the safe house. So Luparelli starts going stir crazy. He starts thinking that the Colombos are trying to poison him. So he's going crazy. And this whole time, the police they're listening in on a wiretap. Now, I'm trying to remember, did Luparelli gave up the apartment, and so the police start listening in on a wiretap. So they're listening to every call that goes in. Luparelli's working with the police, and at the same time, he's worried that these guys are poisoning him. So every call that goes in and out of this apartment for the next couple of weeks about this murder and about killing Joe Gallo and the Colombo's plans and how they're going to get these guys safe and how they're going to get them out of New York, the cops record. So there's no question that, the cops have recordings of these guys on record talked about, we just shot Joe Gallo and here's what we're going to do to get out of the city. And then Luparelli goes into protective custody, and he testifies. He gives up a lot of Colombo information. They've got these recordings. I don't know that anybody went down, because I think that I think that people disappeared and they didn't have enough evidence, because I think it might have been illegal wiretap. I can't remember.
It probably was at that point in time.
I think they were just, I think that, 70. I think they were just trying to get the information, but Luparelli gave up a bunch of information. This is back when they would get guys just to get the information on the mob, especially in the 70s. And they didn't get any of the guys. So officially nobody was charged, but they did record all the information, listen in on it while these guys described all the details of the murder. Those details were then given to the New York Times, who wrote an article about it. When that article came out, Pete the Greek was still in the hospital. I mean, this article came out within a couple weeks of Gallo's murder. Pete the Greek was still recuperating. Pete the Greek was charged. He got a handgun charge.
Yeah, he's a felon, I think. Anyhow,
that's right.
So, and then they had him with a handgun. So,
yeah, he read that article and he started putting things together in his mind and running through. And he had a pretty good idea who was responsible, but that article finally solidified everything. So
he named what was that guy's name?
DiBiase. Yeah, DiBiase, Sonny Pinto, and Luparelli and Joe. That's another thing about this book, is how everybody knows everybody, how small the criminal world is. Everybody knows Greek and everybody knows this one and that one. And he recognized all the guys right off, even if he's a guy that he only knew just a little bit, but it's incredible how he recognized all these guys just by sight. And I guess you have to in the life. But
he didn't testify against any. Nobody testified against him, and that's why there was no charges brought against anybody except
Pete the Greek,
because they had him with a gun. They didn't need another mobster to testify about that. They had the cops and other square johns that were sitting in the tavern. Plus, they probably could forensically tie that gun to Diapolous. So he ends up doing some time. He's the only one that did any time out of it was Diapolous. So,
that's right. The guy who got shot up and shot back was the guy who Carmine DiBiase, Sonny Pinto, the guy who he says and who the article says and who the cops recorded saying shot up the place, did no time. He was eventually murdered I forget what the details were of that, but Carmine DiBiase, Sonny Pinto, he owned a social club. He was killed for something. I can't remember the details.
Oh yeah, I didn't look into
but
that.
Yeah, he was murdered. But yeah, he was the primary shooter. Carmine, Sonny Pinto, DiBiase, and oddly enough, nobody on those recordings mentions Frank Sheeran. And
Gallo's widow said that there were multiple men, all of us were short and appeared to be Italian.
Right. She did not mention any 6'2" Irishmen.
Right. Now, the war kind of like continues on, but it eventually blows up. Albert is a kid. Is he Kid Twist?
Kid Blast.
Gallo. He strikes back. He sends a gunman that he imports from out of town, supposedly from Las Vegas, to a restaurant where he thought some of these Colombo men were eating. They were at the bar that Joseph
Neapolitan noodle.
Oh yeah, Joseph Jacobelli and Alley Boy Persico. Mm-hmm. And Gennaro Langella were, he thought they were responsible, and they were all, in and around this thing. They may not have been exact shooters, but Jacobelli certainly was a guy that sent them over there. Was my understanding from that other, what was that guy's name? All of a sudden I lost his name again, but the one that gave the testimony about it. Luparelli. What he named Jacobelli as a guy that kind of orchestrated everything that night.
Yeah.
So anyhow, he sent this guy over there, and the Jacobelli party was sitting at the bar. Somebody told him about it there at the bar. He sends his gunman in, and they get seated. The hostess comes by and says, "Your table's ready," and 4 Jewish kosher meat salesmen sat at the bar, and their wives went off to the bathroom, as often will happen. This killer enters, and he starts shooting at the 4 men seated at the bar, kills 2 and wounded the other 2, but they're the wrong guys. The story is that the Greeks said there was a big uproar, and he claims that the mayor at the time, John Lindsay, sent a Jewish rabbi over to the President Street Social Club of the Gallos and talked to Larry Gallo and said, we got to stop this stuff, and trying to mediate things, and the authorities never identified the gunman, and no informant ever came forward. And Jacobelli left New York, and Persico became the new boss of the Colombo family. So
yeah, that was a big, when you read about mob blunders, the Neapolitan noodle is always is always one of the first that comes up. That was a big damn deal. And talk about the gang that couldn't shoot straight. I mean, they killing those kosher meat salesmen because the guys they were actually trying to shoot had been seated in the restaurant was
yeah,
and good.
And then the story that came out of that eventually was the commission steps in and says, "Okay, this is done. Yeah. You guys are done unless you're going to incur everybody else's wrath. This is done." Persico allows Albert Gallo and his crew, what he's got left, to be part of the Genovese family, and he
under Chin.
Under Vincent Gigante, and so he ends his days as kind of a respected captain of a crew back in his own neighborhood of Red Hook. As far as I could tell, he was still alive at age 90 in 2019. So I'm not sure if Albert Gallo's
I want to say he just died. I think he just died.
Okay. So the last of the Gallo crew. So it's, I tell you what, this is a heck of a book by Pete the Greek Diapolous.
Mm-hmm. If you can find it, it really goes through. It shows their rackets and how they rip off regular people and how they think and how they act and how they work. It really, The Sixth Family, along with My Life in the Mafia by Vinnie Teresa. I mean, they really show those rackets and how they, kind of odious these guys are with just going after normal people.
Pete the Greek, he did a little bit of time, not a lot, came back out, and he was just done. I think he was somehow, he and Joey Gallo had a connection. You know what I mean? Now you just have a connection with somebody. I think they had some kind of a connection, and he did not have that same connection with Albert. And Albert was the only one left that had a crew. And he just, what he writes in his book is he just laid back. he kind of hung around the edges. He went to Greece for a while, I believe, and slowly but surely just extracted himself out of that lifestyle. He collected some money from some old, kind of interesting. He said he collected some money from another mob guy who had collected. They had settled a strike for a small manufacturer. You know, when you call the mob in to settle your strike, you know what that means. Then you pay them money to settle your strike.
Peaceful negotiations, right, Gary?
So as far as I could tell, Pete the Greek Diapolous was never involved in any criminal behavior again. I'm not even sure if he came back from Greece. I think he did, but I'm not sure.
What's funny is he was really riding Joe throughout this book. Joe Gallo talks about writing his book, and Joey Gallo wants to write Joey Gallo's book, and how careful he's going to have to be. And then Joey Gallo's dead for a couple of years, and Pete the Greek is all, you can't write a book, you can't write a book, you can't write a book. And as soon as Gallo's dead, the first thing Pete the Greek does is write a book.
So, well, thus ends the story of Crazy Joey Gallo. He was kind of a folk hero. Bob Dylan wrote a song about him titled Joey. He kind of cultivated that image, as I said, of this gangster folk hero, the bandit that everybody wants to see get away, and associated with the art scene in New York, which had never been done before. Dylan said, I got a quote from him, I never really considered him a gangster. I always considered him some sort of a hero, an underdog fighting against the elements. So, and he was, and you know, we always like an underdog. And he was like the gang that couldn't shoot straight, but he had this little crew, was a pretty good sized crew, but he always fought against the bosses. Always fought against the bosses, no matter what. He just would not give up that fight against the bosses.
He just had that tenacity, and I do kind of liken him to the Sparrows, you know, just that sort of not going down. Whether it and I don't think there was any way. I mean, Joey had the street smarts, but I don't think he was going to be able to run his own family or anything. But you know, he wasn't going to go down. You know, those Gallo brothers weren't going to go down.
No, man, they didn't. Well, I got the last one. The last one did. He didn't go down. He didn't win either. He was finally willing to compromise and
got Joey, all 5 families after you.
Really. Joey would never compromise. There was no compromise at Joey Gallo. So, but he is one of the most famous, colorful figures of the Mafia in the 1950s, I would say. And next to the murder of Albert Anastasia, this is the other most famous mob murder ever, was a night at Umberto's Clam house. I even remember this before I got 2 inch. I was working in the organized crime unit, so I'd read some of the books, but somehow that whole murder at Umberto's Clam house, the way that whole thing went down, who Joey Gallo was, that always resonated with me, and I always remembered that.
Absolutely.
All right, well, Kim, I think we've done Joey Gallo. I appreciate you helping me with this, and talk a little bit about what you're doing. You've got a book coming out here pretty soon, so folks,
I do. It's
his book.
It's the Married to the Mob and Other Misadventures with Lisa Swan, the ex-wife of Frank Calabrese Jr. It's been a little delayed with this global pandemic, has slowed things down at the publishing house, but it should be coming out very soon. And we'll be doing the media tour, as it were, trying to get on some podcasts and different things. And look for it. I'm getting ready to work on my next project, but that book will be out very shortly.
All right. Well, we look forward to anything you do in the future, Cam. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Absolutely.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode of Gangland Wire. Now, don't forget to like and subscribe down below if you're on YouTube. Now, I started on YouTube, as you all have noticed, I would imagine. If you're on an audio platform like the Apple Podcast app, you can give me a review there. I appreciate that. You can also support the making of each episode by buying me a shot and a beer on your Venmo app. If you have Venmo, that's at Gangland Wire. I have a new way buy me a cup of coffee, there's a link in the show notes to buy me a cup of coffee or two. You can go to my website. You can see all my books and movies that are for sale, or you can donate via your credit card on the PayPal button, or if you have a PayPal account. And if you donate enough, why, you start getting those books and movies in a coffee cup or a t-shirt or whatever you want. And remember, if you are a friend or suffering from PTSD, check out the Veterans Administration resources. Just go to Google and Google PTSD and Veterans Administration, or VA, and you'll find that website, and you'll find there's a hotline, and there's links there to help you find resources to deal with that problem. And remember, look out for motorcycles on the road and stay safe. Bye, folks.
Music provided by our good friend and super fan from Portland, Oregon, Casey McBride. Thanks, Casey.